Now, if you read Outdoor Life magazine, recently you might have read an article about big deer in Kentucky and why everybody wants to come to Kentucky to hunt deer. Hey, we got it going on here, and we're going to talk to somebody who knows just a little bit about that subject. And here she is. Tina Brunjes, Deer and Elk Coordinator. That's a lot of syllables, but I pulled it off.
But it's only 2 critters.
It's only 2 critters. You know what? And we're going to talk about 2 critters today. Everybody is fired up because it is
Deer season and elk season.
It's coming upon us. It's here. And that's a long season. The deer season is a long season. And today, I'm going to offer you an opportunity for something that we don't get to do very often, and that's to brag.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have a lot to brag about.
Well, we do, and we're not doing this in an arrogant manner. We're doing it in a happy manner, I guess you could say. Recently, Outdoor Life came up with an article that talked about the Kentucky deer hunt. Everybody in the world's wanting to come to Kentucky, and this is not something that happens overnight. If you will, give us an overview of how Kentucky got to be this wonderful place where folks can come and deer hunt and walk away with some huge animals. And if you like me, you can fill your freezer with plenty of doe meat as well.
Absolutely. We like to say that right now is the good old days for deer hunting in Kentucky. And you're right, we didn't get here overnight. And we started, as an agency 50 years ago with deer restoration efforts and with very wise, counsel from the biologists who worked hand in hand with the hunters of this state to get us to a point where we have an abundant deer herd. We also have a high quality deer herd. And that's the gold standard. You're trying to achieve both of those things.
Now, a lot of people will say, your knee-jerk reaction to a lot of deer hunters will say, man, I wish I could take more than $1 buck. Some states take 4 or 5 bucks and this, that, and the other. Well, in order to get an Outdoor Life article and people all over the nation saying, I want to come to Kentucky and maybe be an alternative to Kansas or Iowa or some of those big states, we have to do what?
Our 1 buck limit has certainly been a key element in the success of our deer management program. Hats off to John Phillips, one of my predecessors, who was able to convince the hunters who got on board with that management strategy that that was the right thing for Kentucky, to build a herd with an abundant number of deer, not too many in most places, but enough deer for hunters to see them in the field, but also make sure that all those deer are getting sufficient groceries from the habitat in order to produce those quality animals. And a key to that is the 1 buck limit, because most hunters only take 1 or 2 deer a season. And so we have to make sure we get sufficient doe harvest in order to achieve the goals that we're looking for. And the 1 buck limit is a beautiful thing because it allows each hunter the opportunity to harvest the buck that satisfies his or her desires.
How important is it for folks out there to control those populations of does and take does?
You can't emphasize the importance enough. Hunters are our primary deer management tool, and when and how they harvest animals is kind of the underpinning for the management program. And there is a big awareness now that deer meat is such a wonderful alternative because it's free range. It's the original organic meat.
All right, let's talk about some big deer in Kentucky that we all have heard of and seen. There's one in northern Kentucky, that's the current state record deer. Talk about what it takes to get that Boone and Crockett buck. What does a rack need when you're looking at a buck? If that's your thing, I'm more into the meat, but if
right.
The rack is your thing, what do you look at when you see a rack that says, hey, that's going to score well?
There are 3 elements when it comes to antler production, and hunters have control of 2 of those that are most important. Number 1 is nutrition. Without good nutrition, without ample groceries on the landscape in the form of wise use, timber management, plantings, all of those things come together. You got to have food. Number 2 is age. Most bucks are not going to reach their peak antler production until they're 4, 5, 6 years old. And so the key element in getting them into those older age classes, which a lot of hunters have already figured out, is hold off on those yearling bucks, those small basket 8s, and the 2.5-year-olds. Let them get into that older age class. The third element is genetics, and that's the one we as hunters really can't control because half the genetics come from their mother, and we don't know what kind of antler genetics she's carrying. And there have been tons of studies done in pen situations and controlled situations where the ability to manipulate genetics in wild animals, we can't do that like we can with dogs or cats or livestock. So if you're putting the groceries out there and you're harvesting in a wise manner, you're keeping up with the overall numbers through your doe harvest, you're letting those younger bucks walk, then you're allowing that herd to reach its potential. And the thing hunters have to remember too is there's a reason a Boone and Crockett is such a lofty goal. A lot of animals will never, with all the groceries in the world, produce those 160 class or better antlers. But harvesting a mature buck, or a mature doe for that matter, is still a huge challenge, and hunters should really key on that and recognize that you're a whole lot more likely to trip and fall and break your nose walking to the stand than you are to even see a Boone and Crockett level buck. That said, in Kentucky, we've had Boone and Crockett bucks harvested. We have 120 counties. I think there are 9 that we've not had a reported Boone and Crockett harvest from. And most of those have come in the last 5 or 6 years. So your odds anywhere in Kentucky are as good as anybody's of encountering and seeing that buck.
Now, let's talk about some particular bucks that have been taken in Kentucky. It's fun to talk about big deer. It's fun to see pictures of big deer.
Sure.
I remember seeing this picture on the internet, and nobody knew where this deer came from. There was nobody in the picture. It was from Ohio. It was taken out west. It was taken here and there. Well, it ended up being a Kentucky buck taken by an Amish fellow, the Dan Miller buck. That was taken down around Pennyroyal, I think.
On public land.
And that was just a massive deer. Now, when you talk about a deer scoring well, now symmetry has a lot to do with that.
Yes.
If you want really long tines, you want and a lot of width, so on and so forth. But just square inches of antlers. Tell us how deer are scored.
Antlers are scored basically looking at the number of inches of bone. And so you measure the main beam, you measure several circumferences around that main beam, and then you measure each of the tines. And the Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young systems reward symmetry. So if you've got an animal with a broken tine or a missing tine, that's actually going to hurt the overall score. And so there are some other scoring systems that are based solely on the total number of inches.
You know, we talk about the good times, or we're living in the good times now. I can remember
Absolutely.
as a kid, you didn't see deer. And you've heard me say this a million times. Folks have heard me say, I built a tree stand, an actual permanent tree stand over a deer track that I never saw that deer. You know, we have come a long way. But let's look 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. How do we maintain that? How do we keep that going?
You know, I'm a big fan of if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I like
and that is, you know, you should always look at something very carefully before you start tinkering with it. And we do some tweaking and tinkering with our deer seasons, but our hunters have told us repeatedly in surveys they're very happy with the seasons that we have. And they've gotten us here. So what we're trying to do right now is maintain, we recognize you can't be number one every single year, you know, but can we keep our top 5 status? That's our goal. We've been there for a number of years now. We'd like to stay there. But we also want to keep in mind that while folks who are looking for big antlers are a key player, we have a whole nother constituency out there. We have hunters who just want to see deer. We have kids who are looking to harvest their first deer. We have farmers who are trying to bring in the crops. And so we have all these different factors that we keep in mind so that we're striking that balance. You know, you've got to make a whole lot of different people satisfied with the job that you're doing, and that requires constant vigilance.
All right, let's switch gears. Now, in Kentucky, we have a thriving elk population, and you get to go down there and play with that and work with that and watch that thrive. All right, I know it's tough for you, but let's go ahead and brag about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, it's really hard to talk about the success of the elk herd. We have over 10,000 elk in eastern Kentucky now. And that's, you know, there are plenty of people who remember when there were no elk in Kentucky. Right. We issued 1,000 tags for this season, for the 2013 season. And we're tickled to death with the success rates we're still seeing. You know, we've been doing this hunt now since 2001. Right. And we've maintained, you know, close to 90% success for our bull hunters with firearms. Our archery bull hunters have been stacking up some pretty impressive success rates. Our cow hunters are continuing to get it done, and we've got more and more people who are discovering that elk meat is pretty darn tasty.
Oh, I would die for a cow tag.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of folks are also finding that cow archery permit, if your goal is a challenging hunt, if you really enjoy getting out there and testing your woodsmanship skills, take one of those cow archery permits.
I mean, it is tough. It is a challenge, but they're getting them. They're taking them. We're seeing it happen.
They are. They're still getting pretty good success rates with that as well. And we have to remind our hunters that we just got some age data back on some of our cows that we're doing research on. some of these cows that were original release animals are still out there. They're
Wow.
17 to 20 years old.
And bringing that up, what have we found is like a maximum lifespan of elk?
Well, we don't know yet in Kentucky how long they can live because, we're still, 97 was the first release. Right. Other states have had 20-plus-year-old cows, 23, 26-year-old cows. Our 20-year-old cow had a calf this year.
Wow.
Wow, yeah. So you're looking at animals that have, even though they only have one calf per year, they have enormous potential to contribute to the population. And they didn't get to be 20 years old by being stupid. They are a worthy adversary. I can tell you from trying to sneak up on these girls and put a dart in them for research purposes, they're not playing these games with us. And so, it's a lot of folks look at those cow archery odds. For a resident hunter in Kentucky, your odds of getting drawn were 1 in 15 for a cow archery permit. Yes. So real opportunity for a lot of folks to get a chance to get out there and hunt and absolutely be tested, really prove themselves against a worthy opponent.
Now let's talk about what we have here in Kentucky that doesn't happen in the western part of the United States. They have harsh winters, they have predators. We've got a situation here where these guys have they got plenty to eat. They have no really natural predators. Yep. What's going to happen in a couple years? I mean, I'm seeing some monster bulls. What do you anticipate coming out of Kentucky in the next 5 or 6 years?
We have feast or famine in eastern Kentucky in the sense of we have lots of public areas where people are able to get in there and hunt. But we also have areas where the elk generally don't see very many people. They've moved out of the areas where people are, and they have found those sanctuaries. And we occasionally see pictures of some huge bulls that are, just absolute mooses. I mean, just body fat. They're so fat, they're jiggling. And so we know that the grocery situation over there is really good. This year we expect it to be particularly good. We've got a good mast crop coming on. Elk do take advantage of acorns the same way that deer do.
Eat the fire out of them.
They do. They're primarily grazers most of the year. They don't focus on browse the way deer do. But pretty much everything that can get an acorn in its mouth will eat acorns. They're kind of nature's superfood. So we expect that this year, even if we do get a harsh winter, we've had a very wet summer. There's been abundant forage out there for everything that eats green stuff has been, eating itself out of house and home. So we've got these animals going into the winter in good condition. We've got a good mast crop that should get them through the rut. Even in good conditions, those bulls will drop a couple 100 pounds from right now into December, January. They'll go from fat and sassy and sleek and really pretty to looking like a bag of bones because they've just been out there doing what they do. We
don't know. There's a vast amount of woods out there. We really don't know what might be lurking out there. And that's the great thing every year. We already know that we have several in the 360 range, which is huge, correct?
Well, our typical state record scored 371. Wow. That's the net score. Our biggest non-typical so far has been 372 and 6/8. Yeah, when you start getting into 360s and above, now you're talking about Boone and Crockett book elk. And for most hunters, I still see a 330 class. That is a big bull. That is an adult animal. That is something you're just not going to see every day. And we've got this research project that we're doing on bulls right now. And one of the things we're finding is what kind of a lot of people suspected is that these older bulls, they stay in the timber. They stay in the timber all year long. They start to lose their mind a little bit this time of year and make mistakes, and that's when hunters have to be in the right place at the right time. But we definitely have some big antlers coming out of eastern Kentucky, and that's a sign that these animals are really living the good life for an elk.
I remember the initial concerns was, these elk are in this area, and why is there not one in Evansville, Indiana? Well, it seems to me like, and correct me if I'm wrong, if they have everything they need, they're good to go. They're going to establish their little area, and they're not going anywhere. And they've got it here.
They do, and we are finding that dispersal off of the sites where they're born is relatively low. And we're happy with that. You don't necessarily want 500-pound animals just striking off and deciding to go to Louisville. And so we've been pretty pleased with the slow but steady expansion that we've seen from those 8 original release sites.
Well, I'll tell you what, the seasons are upon us. Everybody's tickled to death because the hunting seasons are here.
Yep.
I want to thank you so much for coming and talking
You
with
bet.
us. Good job, and thanks for, I know how hard you work. You're constantly up there. You're taking phone calls. You're very busy. We don't get to say thank you very much, but I think the state says thank you, Tina.